We have a particular configuration coming in right now. It's operational already, in fact. I have not been able to find a time in history when Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries has happened. And that really has great promise for us in terms of a whole new episode for humanity. There's going to be another giant leap in our understanding of consciousness. It's the breakdown of the old order. All of the systems that were not birthed from love are collapsing. It's the big new beginning, but it's a co-creation. It's not happening to us, it's happening through us. Everything is converging. At every level of being in the cosmos, you've got very rapid changes happening, and they all are affecting each other. With this increasing psychic sensitivity and opening up of our multidimensionality, we are going to be able to communicate with the animal world, the plant world, galactic beings, all forms of life within this one consciousness, of which we are one divine fractal. The Hermetic philosophy of the macro and the micro. There's lots more to come. There's lots more to come this year. The less frequent an astrological aspect is, the more power it has generally, the more power it has for the collective as well as us individually. So we have a particular configuration coming in right now. It's operational already, in fact, but it will become more exact through 2026. It'll continue through 2027 and then gradually ease off. And it's a very positive aspect, actually. It's a 120-degree trine between Pluto and Uranus, and then the midpoint of that is a conjunction between Saturn and Neptune. And Neptune comes to the midpoint of a trine between Pluto and Uranus about every 500 years. But it doesn't do that at 0 of Aries, the creator degree, the most powerful degree in the whole zodiac, the whole new beginning degree, and it doesn't do it with Saturn as well. So digging back in history, I have not been able to find a time in history when that particular configuration with Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries has happened. And in fact, very good astrologer Ray Merriman said the same, that this was completely unique. So if it's completely unique, then that really has great promise for us in terms of a whole new episode for humanity, because I'm reading the symbolism of all of that too. But it isn't just that, you know, I love to actually go beyond the astrology as well and look at what's happening cosmologically and what's happening with the sun and what's happening in science, etc., and what's happening in the yuga cycles, etc. And when you start to draw on all those different modalities, there is an incredible convergence of opinion and activity about these times right now. We are in it. We are in the mush of the caterpillar. We are in the metamorphosis. And the next 3 years in particular, I think, are going to be incredibly powerful in this very rapid, accelerated evolution for humanity. And we are co-creating this in every moment. You and I right now in this conversation are creating our tomorrows and our tomorrows after that. So we have to be much more conscious and wise of every thought, every emotion, every intention that we set, of how we are creating that. Because these are, it's not just same old, these are really big, rare times. So I don't know if that's answered your question, Amrit?
No, it really has. It really has. And one of the, I mean, I've heard you continuously draw, like almost inviting us to draw out of ourselves. Like, what are you dreaming in? Who are you becoming? Like, and there's this real, it's not just, oh yeah, like what's been your dream for the last 10 years? You know, what's been, you know, who have you been becoming in the work you've put in, you know, into the career that you've had? It's like, right now, where is your focus? What are you dreaming in? Who are you becoming? And there's this subtext to make it big. Can you explain where that's coming from?
Yes, it is linked to this configuration of planets, but it's, if I look at Neptune, Neptune has a 165-year orbit, and it's been in Pisces for the last 13, 14 years. And Pisces is all about dreaming. Neptune is all about dreaming. It's linked to spirit, it's linked to unconditional love, it's linked to a kind of yearning for perfection and connection to source, actually, this sense of one consciousness. And that has just exited the last degree of Pisces. So particularly while it was in Pisces for the last 13, since about 2011, we have been essentially hatching a new dream, even if that was subconscious. It's now, as of the 30th of March, it's entered Aries, and it's going to stay in Aries until the later months of the year, pull back into Pisces. So it's like these next few months are like a rehearsal time for who the new you is, individually and collectively. Who are we becoming as humanity? Who are we becoming individually? So for the next few months, until the autumn months, Northern Hemisphere, it stays in Aries. Then it, for a very final time in its cycle, it backtracks again into Pisces, last degree or so. And then finally, beginning of next year, January, February, it launches into Aries for another 14 years. And Aries, particularly the very first degree of the zodiac, is the kind of launch pad, because it's the creator degree, the most powerful degree in the entire zodiac. It's like a whole new jump to a new state of being. And I'm saying a new state of being because it's being fed geometrically by so many other planets with their mythology. So I can't just separate it out. But it really, the promise of it is a whole new state of being, physically, spiritually. The fact that Saturn joins Neptune in this conjunction, and that's happening already operationally, is making it manifest, making it real, not just a pipe dream of yearning and wouldn't it be lovely if. It's making it realistic, pragmatic, but it's also a very strong sense of becoming your own spiritual hero. Not deferring to the external, but realizing everything is inside of us and becoming your own spiritual hero, moving away from the deference to external authority. So I think it's going to be a tremendously powerful time of spiritual sovereignty, of not only psychological and emotional sovereignty, of, the more we give our power away, the less well it works, frankly. The last few years have been a great demonstration of that, I think. But if I take my power back, how is this going to run for me? And I suggest we're all going to do that, not in a selfish way at all, because we're also, that Neptune-Saturn conjunction is plugged into Pluto in Aquarius as a sextile. And Pluto in Aquarius is about plugging into community, plugging into the group, plugging into humanity, a greater sense of equanimity and equality, and how can we help the greater good. So there's a sense of, I've got a stronger sense of my unique essence, I've got a stronger sense of my spiritual sovereignty, and I want to feed those gifts back to the community, back to the collective. What can I do? What is my particular piece of the puzzle that I want to gift to humanity to make a stronger whole? Because this is a big time for shifting towards community, because there's going to be a hole in the next few years, despite what's happening on the news. Don't watch the news. A shift from vertical socio-political structure to horizontal. That's where if I'm looking at the historical cycles, that's where we're going. Yes, does that make sense, Amrit? So getting into community is one of the best things you can do. Even if it's online, even better in person. Get together with
Yeah, I think there's some very clear marching orders in there. I'm feeling it as well. The Inspired Evolution, we've been doing this thing called Sunday service, not too dissimilar to your meditations that you have. And just bring people together. And you can just sort of feel that it's almost like there's this real thirst for people to connect. And it's not even like you're trying. It's just everybody is already primed and ready to want to connect and vibe together. There's it's not just, I want to expand that concept of community a little bit, because I think we think it's other people. But you talked about something, I'm not sure if it's called a Sabian symbol, but maybe you can tell me if it is or if it isn't. But you talked about the 0 degrees of Aries, and I wanted to zoom in there a little bit, because you said it is the most powerful. I mean, that's quite a statement. And then you look at the Sabian symbols and you said you kind of round it up to 1 when you start to analyze what's going on for Aries. And there's a very beautiful symbol there that also sort of speaks to community potentially being broader than just the human species.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, thank you, Amrit. Yes, the Sabian symbol for, you've got it rounded up to 1 degree of Aries. I don't know why, but that's the way they operate. And it is a seal coming out of the ocean to embrace a woman. The seal embraces the woman. I think, wow, yeah, it's just beautiful. I mean, how forgiving is that for a start? Of, we've not treated the animal world well, but there's a sense, because the animals are way ahead of us, I think, in their dimensions. I mean, the whales, the turtles, the dolphins are supposed to be 15th dimensional, according to Joan Ocean's beautiful work of swimming with the dolphins for many, many years. So they are helping to lead us in this evolution. And, we're the laggards here. Humanity are the laggards. So with this increasing psychic sensitivity and opening up of our multidimensionality, we are going to be able to communicate with the animal world, the tree world, the plant world in a much deeper way than we have ever done. And it will bring us back to this sense of one consciousness. So when you're asking about community, Amrit, it doesn't just mean I'm going to get together with my friends down the street and buy a plot of land and grow parsnips. It's actually coming together with all of life, not just human life, animal life, tree life. And actually that's going to include the galactic beings, it's going to include the inner earth beings, it's going to include the sea beings, it's going to include all forms of life within this one consciousness, of which we are one divine fractal. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it is inspiring to feel into, and I can see where we're shifted. But at the moment, the more I look around, people are really feeling the squeeze, like really feeling the squeeze as they're going through this shift and transition. Is it a case that, what you're sharing has a lot of hope, a lot of inspiration in it? Is that also by design, knowing that this time is actually going to be kind of crunchy for us to actually need to move through?
It is, because it's the breakdown of the old order and the old systems. But it's kind of as crunchy as we allow it to be, if you know what I mean. Because if we can stay, as I so often bang on about, in a better state of love and joy and peace and gratitude and compassion, I do believe that we will be bubble wrapped from some of the worst excesses. Personally, it doesn't mean totally, because there are going to be some big global events, I think, to do with, increased seismic activity, and I can talk about reasons for that, and landmass changes, that kind of thing. So it isn't that life will be perfectly smooth, because I don't think it will for everybody at all. That's kind of pie in the sky. But the more you can stay in a good state, the more you'll be able to ride the waves. And we all have personal challenges. I mean, these are big times. I mean, we can see that a lot of the political system isn't working. We can see a lot of the medical system isn't working, the judicial system, many systems aren't working. The power grids are going to be incredibly challenged going forwards. We had the big blackout recently in Portugal and Spain and a bit of southern France. The power grids will be increasingly challenged because they're very old in many countries, UK particularly, US particularly, and this striving for green energy, which seems like a wonderful idea because it's not dirty energy and isn't that great, is actually incompatible with the old power grid systems. So what this will force ultimately is a shift to free energy, which of course was developed many years ago and hasn't been publicly available. But I mean, I was just reading today before I hopped online here that there's some Australian engineers who've developed a motor that runs on light. Some scientists have discovered that there's enough hydrogen in the earth to generate free energy for the whole of the earth for 170,000 years. I was just reading that this morning. There are 3 African schoolgirls, literally schoolgirls, in a tiny village that has no electricity. They have learned how to generate electricity for their village through their urine. And it must be the urea in their urine that's doing that. So, from the tiny to the, potentially much greater, there are going to be so many exciting innovations, solutions, rediscoveries, remembrances. And with galactic input as well, I feel we are going to move to an age of incredible, infinite amounts of free energy. So we're not going to pay electricity bills in future, etc. But we are in a period of collapse at the moment. And just recognize that that's what it is. So don't think, oh my God, the world's gone to hell in a handbasket. Well, it has, but only temporarily. And astrologers would be surprised if this wasn't happening, because I've been talking about this for the last 3 years. And, I'm sure other astrologers have too, that the old has to collapse. Firstly, for us to see we're not going to do that again and end up in such a state of suffering and wars and poverty and misery and disease. We're not going to do that again. So we have to see it, but also to really birth something fundamentally different, more loving, heart-centered, and based on community. We're going to be living from the heart moving forwards.
Inspired souls, I wanted to take a deep moment to thank all of you that are subscribed to this channel. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to the channel. Thank you so much for your incredible love and your support. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, at the time of this recording, only 20% of regular return viewers are subscribed to the channel. 80% of you haven't yet hit subscribe. Please do take a moment. It helps with everything we're doing here, championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet. The subscribe button below is lighting up in the colors of the inspired evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon, and thank you so much in advance for your support. And 2025 really seems, things start to ease off. Is it 2027 or 2028? But 2025 seems to be the real, where the sort of jam hits the scone sort of thing.
Yeah, this is the big year of change, and I was anticipating this, but we really are, and there's lots more to come. There's lots more to come this year, but between now and April 2026, Pluto's already made its move into Aquarius, and it's not going back into Capricorn. But apart from that, the other outer planets, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and I'm not even thinking here of the dwarf planets, are all going to be changing signs back and forwards until next April. As of next April, Uranus finally moves into Gemini in this current cycle, and it stays there till 2033. So they have settled, if you like, in their new signs in the tropical Western zodiac as of April next year. And I haven't looked at 2026 in great detail, but I believe there'll be a settling, because there's an astrological settling of less toing and froing, an old world and new world, and where are we, and the old's collapsing, nothing's reliable, another blackout, did you remember to buy a candle and a torch and a bottle of water? So this is the big year of turbulence. And I feel late spring, early summer, it starts to settle a little bit. That's my view. But this big physiological change we're going through will obviously continue for quite some years. We're just at the beginning of this metamorphosis, really. But it's exciting, and at least we're here at the beginning.
Yeah, I'm reminded. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I said I was just reminded of ecology. Like when I was studying little bits of ecology for some other podcasts, it was always like in the middle of like a domain, things are actually quite they're interesting, but they're not that interesting. They're kind of boring because it's all homogenous, but it's at the edge of two environments when they meet that there's just all this interesting stuff happening. And it's like, when you speak to like an agriculturist or a horticulturist, they sort of come in and it's like, what's happening at the edge of the environments? So that's really where certain bacteria are meeting other things. And it feels like this is like the meeting of two separate times.
Yeah, beautifully said. And it is. It is. It's very interesting talking to the wonderful cosmologist, Dr. Jude Currivan. She said the greatest potential for a change of state is when everything is chaotic, when the old state is freed up. Because, if we go back a decade, everything was much more fixed. Couple of decades, everything was much more fixed and permanent. You had a job for life and a home for life, and everything was long term and very reliable. That's all up for grabs right now as the old systems collapse. And so that but it's also a function of very new energy coming in, very high frequency light coming in, that is destabilizing the old low frequency energy that is not based on love. You know, all of the systems that were not birthed from love are collapsing, because this very high frequency light from the, you know, the great central sun is coming in. We've also got the fact that the Earth is moving through the galactic current sheet. It only does that every 12,000 years. We're at the peak of solar cycle 25. We've got a huge amount of solar activity. And the geophysicist Stephen Burns talks about this all the time. You know, we don't just have weather now, we have space weather. We've never talked about space weather before, but now we're talking about space weather. And this particular period we're in May is super active in terms of, there was a huge solar wind over this past weekend. It was traveling at 600 kilometers a second. That's 3 times the speed of normal. You know, big geomagnetic storms, heightened seismic activity. And because you've got this layering, you know, Earth's passing through the galactic current sheet, only happens every 12,000 years. All this incredible light coming from our great central sun. The magnetic field of the Earth has dropped quite significantly. We're at the peak of this sun's activity in this particular cycle, this 11-year cycle. So the drop in the Earth's magnetic shield, we think of it like a cotton wool buffer, is allowing in a lot more solar activity than we have had before, certainly in recent times. We also have the fact that the Earth is more electrified than it has ever been before, because we've got all these satellites spinning around the Earth. They weigh, a lot of the satellites weigh about 14 kilos. They're metallic, they're highly conductive. A lot of them just kind of burn up. Some burn up in the sun, others are just dead, but still orbiting around the Earth, and there's no cosmic garbage collector up there. So all of that increased electrification, obviously, because everything is connected, every layer of our atmosphere down into the inner Earth core, everything is connected. That has ramifications, and nobody really knows what the ramifications are, because we haven't had that degree of electrification and kind of connectivity in those terms than we have right now. This is an experiment, because we haven't been in that. So you've got many, many layers of input, together with the fact you've got some very unique astrology as well. And then on top of that, you could put all the ancient prophecies of the Hopi and the Quero and the Mayans, etc. And you can add in the sort of activation of our 24th chromosome. You can add that in. So we've got you've got people like Lee Harris, wonderful Lee Harris, and Richard Rudd talking about the new human, the future human, as these changes happen in our biology as well. So at every level of being in the cosmos, you've got very rapid changes happening, and they all are affecting each other. You know, nothing is separate in this one consciousness, everything's connected. And so that's why we're in such an accelerated period of change, but also evolution, because nature is very clever. This divine intelligence, Gaia, is going through her own upgrade too, in that divine intelligence will always run ahead of the challenges and somehow create a solution for us as well. But recognize this is the degree of change and turbulence oh, and by the way, we're at the end of the 12,000 year Kali Yuga cycle, which apparently ended, according to Bibu Dev Misra, on the 21st of March this year. That's the end of a 12,000 year cycle as well. And we're into the beginning of an ascending phase of consciousness. And so everything is converging. You know, looking at the Yuga cycles, looking at the ancient prophecies, looking at the cosmology, looking at the solar activity, looking at the astrology, everything is converging. The channeling, people who are channeling and talking about this as well, and the shift from carbon to crystalline, everything is converging in these times. It's not we're talking 10 years down the road. We are in it, right? I mean, today, this moment, we are right in it. Yeah.
Pam, I want to just poking it around your hope a little bit, if that's okay. Not to sort of challenge disrespectfully, but this comment around divine intelligence will outstrip yeah, will continue to like continuously lead, and then we will experience just in the tail dust of that comet, if you will. Pardon the pun. I know this is an astrology podcast. I did well there. But is that a belief for you, or do you like? Yeah, can you tell me about that? Because it's
It's
empowering as, but yeah.
it's certainly a belief. It's something which my good friend Janet Trelaw, who channels Zach, who's an aspect of Dwal Kul, he has talked about this a lot, Dwal Kul, in terms of, nature will always find a solution. But it's also, frankly, it's the fact that some species may be dying out, but other species are actually evolving. For instance, I don't know, about 6 months ago, a gigantic mountain range was discovered underwater off the coast of Chile, which nobody had ever known about. And what they found was there were incredible new species nobody had ever known about of sea life and plants, etc., that were just incredible. And going forwards, I mean, I haven't eaten meat for 50 years, but certainly the plant life could be incredibly nutritious for us. And because I think going forwards, we're going to eat less, but more densely packed nutrition going forwards. Another example is in Antarctica, a massive iceberg sort of fell off the ice sheet that was the size of the city of Chicago. But underneath that ice sheet, what was revealed was a whole new ecosystem again. Again, new sea life, new plant life, etc. So in that way, we think that, and we are treating nature extremely badly. So some species are going to be tested and driven to extinction, and that is beyond heartbreaking. But because of all that's happening with the changes of the earth, the climate, landmass changes, other species are going to emerge, because there's always, with divine intelligence, this sense of life force. And that life force, that evolution is never going to end. We as souls are infinite. I mean, that's the really good news, and also the really bad news that, you never end, you go on and on. So there will always be life in some form. And the way nature works, and I believe, I hope I'm not misquoting Dr. Jude Currivan, would support this, that there is always running ahead a natural solution to whatever problem. In Chernobyl recently, the awful, that terrible explosion many years ago, there's a fungus which is thriving on the radiation. I don't know if you saw that.
I did see this, a black fungus, which is actually growing and it's processing the radiation.
Yeah, and there's a fungus that thrives on plastic, just adores a gourmet meal of microplastics and living in the ocean. So although on the one side, we're going to see great sadness when species go extinct, on the other side, I think what we have to do is feel excited and welcome in what's coming, because that, we can't keep hanging on to the old if it's not meant to continue. And I'm thinking of that particularly with systems and the way society works. I'm really in saying that, thinking about how we've got to welcome in the new and create something much more loving to every species on Earth going forwards. To every species has respect, has love, has care. No animal or any living being is hungry or suffers. There's this much greater sense. I always get this sense of ancient Lemuria, because they lived in harmony with the earth and harmony with all of the creatures, and they would never kill animals to eat or that kind of thing. They just flowed, they just flowed in harmony, and they lived much more in the light being than we currently do. But that's kind of what I think we could be partly remembering, because the way we're moving forwards as humanity is an evolution, but I think it's also an involution in terms of a remembrance of a lot of ancient wisdom.
Hi there, guys. I wanted to take a quick moment just to introduce you to my one-to-one coaching. It's something that I deeply love doing. As you can tell, conscious conversation is such a massive part of my life. And having one-to-one, deep, meaningful conversations with people where I get to show up as your brother or as the coach or as your mentor has been such a gift for me personally, and a gift for lots of the people that I have supported on the journey of living a more spiritually empowered, spiritually powered, spiritually aligned life. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's some examples of people all around the world that have experienced profound transformations through this coaching experience.
Amrit is a fantastic coach.
In a few sessions, he got to a depth that I'd only experienced before working with certain medicines. And
he's gone through a lot of the struggles that you're probably facing. And Amrit's been a really strong, supportive figure in my journey.
In control of myself.
I'm kinder to myself.
I actually have that vision and a purpose.
I do feel like I'm a better version of myself already.
Amazing energy.
He was easy to talk to, which made me easy to trust him.
Working with Amrit at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and really I was bouncing out of bed.
Whenever I get off the calls with Amrit, best money we've ever spent.
I would not recommend him because I don't want everyone to know about him, and then I won't be able to book him. If he gets too busy, I won't get my turn.
I would say absolutely.
There's no way you can work with Amrit for a period of time without being transformed.
So if you're considering him as a coach, do not hesitate, because you won't be disappointed.
Alrighty, so hopefully that's inspiring your evolution onwards and upwards. And if you are so inspired to evolve, you can book in a one-to-one call with me directly at www.amrit.coach/life. And guys, if I can say so myself, I do think this is something quite special. Most people that I see building things online don't really work with people this deeply, this intimately, one-on-one as things start to grow, just because it is so time intensive. And yet I'm so deeply passionate about the transformation that comes from one-to-one coaching that just isn't available anywhere else. It would be my absolute honor and a pleasure to support your spiritual awakening, your spiritual path, your spiritual unfoldment. It is my life's work. I look forward to seeing you in the call. Back to today's podcast. Yeah, I've wanted to, actually, you've touched on something there. I've wanted an animation for the Inspired Evolution logo, which is like Inspired Evolution. And then every now and then the letters would collapse in on each other to sort of say Involution. And then they'd expand out to say Inspired Evolution and then sort of collapse in to say Involution. Because it is, anyway, that's just a nerdy thing. I don't know why I brought that into the podcast. Pardon me.
I think it's going to be fabulous because we're going to, discover all the, these ancient systems, ancient knowledge that the indigenous people have never lost, that we have in our modern life thought we're kind of super sophisticated, but we've lost that connection to the earth and her great wisdom and intelligence. That's what's going to come back for us as well.
There's very much a frequency that I can feel at this point in the conversation, and maybe that's just because I'm Indian, but I feel this frequency of like Shiva being present. It's like this very much the making room for the new, and it's, there's a benevolence and a benevolent awareness to that. There is a part of me that, gets stuck in, I guess, 3D psychology and sort of ask the question a little bit around, just ask the question a little bit around, people are feeling quite anxious though when things start to shift and change like that, as much as there's a larger spiritual narrative at play. It does seem to sort of, like the psychologies that sort of try to cope with what's going on. And I mean, I'm going to cram a few questions into one, if that's okay, because the key thing in there is I'm noticing, and, I'm just a humble guy running a podcast, I guess, touch wood at some end, but even myself studying more astrology, and I think we talked about this last time, you said more and more people are going to be becoming more and more astrologically aware. You even mentioned just before, Stephen Burns, we had him on the podcast, and, he's talking about like, there's space weather now, not just like planet weather. And so do you see that as somewhat of a sign of the times that we're going through, A, but then B, is that almost like a necessary prerequisite? Because I don't know how else to put this, but the more astrology I study, I actually find it more grounding to be able to navigate the shifts and the change than anything else at this particular moment in time. Do you see that?
Yeah. Well, because I'm such an old hack at this, it's just I've been doing this for a lifetime. So, but yeah, it's good to hear that you that you say that, Amrit. So thank you for that. Yeah, because it can be so practical. I mean, astrology is fabulously spiritually inspiring, but it's also so grounded, so practical, because it can act as a day-to-day practical framework of when the world seems to be falling apart. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not surprised, and other astrologers aren't either, because I've been talking about this for 3 years, been expecting this kind of extreme and collapse, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't happening. So that gives me great reassurance, and I can see beyond these current times, particularly if humanity gets its act together in terms of co-creating something wonderful. And you know, I think the first part of your question was about a greater understanding of the cosmos, and I think absolutely we were going to get that, because every time Pluto moves through Aquarius, which isn't very often because it was only last there in 1798, from 1777 to 1798, every time, if I go back in historical cycles, we've got a deeper understanding, further out in space understanding of the cosmos. I think this time around, because of the mythology of Sedna, we are also going to get a much deeper understanding of our deep oceans and the inner earth beings that are part of the whole galactic family. But ultimately, we are going to come back to realizing everything is within us. All of it is within us, because we live in a holographic universe. And so really the most important thing, and astrology is brilliant at this as well, because it's, you know, looking at a birth chart, in the same moment you are looking at a pattern in the heavens at the moment of your birth, and you're also looking at your inner psyche, your soul's unique blueprint for this lifetime at the same moment. So you're looking at the outer and the inner, you know, the Hermetic philosophy of, you know, the macro and the micro, the higher and the inner. So, and I think because of the astrology, particularly that Saturn Neptune conjunction at 0 of Aries and this sense of spiritual sovereignty I was talking about earlier, we really are going to understand that everything comes from us, and everything in our reality is really a mirror reflection of the frequency that we're broadcasting. And I really, you know, I'm trying to live my life as an experiment with that, as a game with that. I mean, generally, I'm a pretty steady, calm, balanced person, and the astrology helps me massively with that. But so are all the other things I do. You know, walk in nature and woodland, do breath work. You know, blah 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 blah. I had a personal event a week ago, and I don't want to talk about the detail in this because it's not relevant. But I had a very dramatic and shocking personal event a week ago, which sent me reeling for about 2 days. I was just in free fall for about 2 days, and running around and asking other people their opinions, and, you know, trusted, loving people. And I thought, do you know what? This is all about me, and I've got to walk my talk. And this is a personal test of how well am I going to do that? Am I going to feed the fear, the really big scary thing that's hitting my personal reality, you know, right between the eyes at the moment? Or am I going to focus on a much more loving and positive possibility? Because it's up to me which I focus on. And I managed somehow in the swirl of, you know, you can't be serious, to get a grip and say, right, I'm going to live with love for myself, and I'm going to get a grip, and I'm going to be calm, and I'm going to do some breath work, I'm going to walk in the woods, and I'm going to be in a good, positive place to create a very different reality, whatever any expert is telling me. And that really has been a very profound personal test for me in the last week, to walk my talk. But I think I'm doing it quite well, at least so far. So, you know, that came right into my own personal world. But it was a test, because I do believe that everything comes from us. Everything is about our frequency. And yes, of course, we feed into the collective, and we live within the collective frequency. So we're each a drop in that ocean. But nevertheless, we have great impact on our own individual reality and our individual future going forwards. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry you're going through so much, and thank you so much for sharing yourself so abundantly in there. And I think
no, it wasn't so good last Monday, so it's lucky.
there's a key piece in there, like, because you still had to go through your process for a couple of days there, and then you had to then you grabbed a hold, and I think that speaks volumes to the depth of what you're going through, but then also because I think there's some sort of myth that we don't stuff doesn't hit us. We're made of Teflon or something. Stuff still hits us, and then it's about us. It's all order and chaos at the end of the day, right? That yin and that yang. And then there's just some sort of semblance of order. And everybody's going to find order in a different way within their, in their own psyche, in their own systems based on the life that they've lived, right? But what I'm hearing from you, again, throughout the majority of this podcast is it's incumbent upon us to build that order and not just succumb and flap in the wind when, the winds pick up.
Absolutely. And that's an individual choice. Nobody can do that for you. Nobody, because if you're going to ask advice of other people, they may give you a scenario which isn't optimum. And there was a lot of that. So, that it was coming from a very loving place from them. But nevertheless, there are always an infinite number of possibilities, I think, for people. So am I going to feed with all of my knowledge and what I say in my videos? Am I going to feed the really big scary one? Or am I going to feed the loving one? What am I going to do? And only I can make that choice. Nobody else can make that choice because I live in my own frequency. So it has to be a command. It really is about spiritual sovereignty, a strong command of your own emotional state to say, I'm not going there. I am absolutely going to starve out the scary, and I'm going to love in the good, and I'm going to go on a different trajectory with all of this, whatever the facts are. So, because our reality is already so malleable, but it's going to become more malleable as we move forwards. And we are really going to get, now I've said this before, we're really going to get everything is about energy and frequency. Pluto and Aquarius with that double jaggedy line cliff for Aquarius. It always has been about energy and frequency, but we are really going to understand that is our medicine going forwards, how we create our realities based on our energy and frequency. Everything is about that, and that's where the mastery is going to come, in really grasping that. So it's been an interesting week.
Inspired souls, at this particular moment in time, there is such a deep need, in my humble opinion, for us to stay grounded, connect back to nature, and there is such a profound wisdom in earthing and grounding. For those of you that don't know, the sun is consistently pouring electrons into us. It's energizing us, giving us the vitality here on Earth. And the episode I did with Clint Ober from earthing.com talks a lot about this. One of the things that is a challenge, though, is our rubber soles and the concrete environments that we're in. The electrons basically circulate up and down and continue to circulate in our bodies rather than being discharged back to the Earth, which is the right way that the flow is meant to go. Overloaded electron charge means more fire when you have too much electricity, and that fire is the inflammation in your body, and most diseases come from inflammation. And so you can reduce the free radical damage that's occurring, you can reduce the inflammation, ultimately by spending time with your bare feet in the earth. Now, we don't always get to do that underneath my desk here in the office, despite all the studio lights. What we've got going on is a earthing mat from earthing.com, and one of my favorite products is actually the earthing bed sheet that lies on your bed and actually grounds you for 8 hours as you sleep. Such an incredible gift to be earthing while you're resting and while you're working. Here at the Inspired Evolution, we've partnered with earthing.com. You can get yourself 10% off with the discount code INSPIRE. That's INSPIRE at earthing.com. You can use the link in the description below, and that'll take you over there and support your health and wellness with earthing.com. You're talking a lot about free choice here, and the importance of the choice that we have on how we show up. And I mean, in a very layperson perspective, when we're talking to an astrologer, talking about choice, it seems like there's a lot of free will. And so, but then for the layperson as well, astrology is it is all written in the stars. It's all destined.
Great
and
question.
so there's like a real rub here that we've sort of opened up a little bit. Thank you for being vulnerable around destiny and free will. Your thoughts?
Yeah, really good question. The way I've usually the sort of analogy I've used is that for this lifetime, your soul chooses this particular incarnation and this particular birth chart. And I believe that in my bones through all of the many years of study. So it's like your unique sheet of music, and that pattern of that sheet of music is set. But the level at which you play it, you know, you're going to have a little life or you're going to have a magnificent life, is down to your free will. Now, certain elements of astrology, I think, are more fated. The nodal axis has got a lot to do with destiny and fate, because there's a kind of leaking in of past life material and information and issues very often. So that has a greater sense of fate. Pluto transits have a greater sense of fate, but broadly, I think we have great latitude in how we play our unique sheet of music. And the wonderful thing, I mean, one of the many, many wonderful things about astrology is once you understand the language, you can change gear on your transits. And for instance, if you're having a Neptune transit, in its less positive expression, Neptune transits can mean that we feel we're lost, we're in a fog, we're weepy, we're droopy, we don't know who we are, or, you know, can't get a grip. And if you recognize, if you know enough astrology to say, that's my Neptune transit, you know, on my sun or my moon or whatever, this is an incredibly spiritual and creative transit. So if I can turn my attention to listening to music, writing poetry, meditating, candle gazing, that kind of thing, listening to the birds even, then I'm using my Neptune transit much more optimally than if I'm just swishing around sobbing. You know, if you understand the mythology. And even yesterday I was filming a very simple video on Jupiter moving into Cancer on the 9th of June. And, you know, a less positive expression of that, you can be emotionally indulgent and overly sentimental, and weren't the good old days great, and isn't today absolutely miserable, and no comparison to that. You know, you can kind of get very clingy in relationships, and, you know, those are the less good expressions. However, if you got enough astrological vocabulary to realize that, you can say, boy, but this is a beautiful transit. This is all about self-care and nurturing other people and not being over fussy and protective, but caring for them in a natural, instinctive way. So, you know, you can start to use astrology strategically rather than in any destined or fated way. You know, I understand my sheet of music well enough to change gear on my transits and live it much more positively and beautifully than I otherwise would if I was just the rubber hitting the road and I didn't have any language of astrology. Does that make sense, Amrit?
It really does. I've got a trippy question to ask you. I'm not sure if you've come across someone called Federico Fejin. We had him on the podcast, and he talks very much, well, he's the guy that gave us the microprocessor, his innovations in silicon. And you will be very pleased to discover that he had a, I'm going to be quite reductionist when I say a white light experience. And he has since dedicated his incredible mind and work and efforts to the hard problem of consciousness and studying it from a quantum level. And it's been absolutely phenomenal. And I guess this was triggered to me because I was watching some of the transits that's currently been a part of this focus of yours that's going through 2025 to 2027. And yeah, Uranus, Pluto, you linked that to the printing press, microchips, even that's when we landed on the moon last. And you see, you know, certain things happening, particularly at this time. And I was going to ask potentially what you saw was going to shift for us with that Uranus, Pluto energy. And I just couldn't, like, I almost saw Federico as like an avatar for this shift.
Yeah, amazing. No, I haven't heard his name. How absolutely fascinating. We are going to get a much greater scientific understanding of what consciousness is. But of course, consciousness is always much bigger than science. But if we look back, I mean, certainly Uranus-Pluto combinations have given us revolutions in our understanding of consciousness. But actually, so have Neptune-Pluto combinations, and we've got all of them in this configuration.
Both happening right now, yeah.
the whole lot. Because last time we had a conjunction between Neptune and Pluto was around 1891 to 1893, and that was the birth of quantum physics, where Max Planck was just kind of dissing the old physics model and saying, actually, this is all about quanta, about discontinuous packets of energy that make up our reality depending on the observer effect. And that was the birth of quantum physics, over 100 years ago. So we are going to together with the opening up of our psychic sensitivity and multidimensionality, we are going to discover, so there's going to be another giant leap in our understanding of consciousness. And science is going to keep up with some of that, but of course consciousness, as I say, will always run ahead. I think this configuration I'm talking about will also produce a lot of tech, like virtual reality goggles, to enable us or jump us into states of transcendence, to make that a rapid process. Up to you whether you go the tech route or you go the organic route, that's entirely up to you. But it will enable us to have those kinds of experience very quickly, to understand what real radiance and transcendence feels like. And certainly our neural networks are going to open up in much bigger ways. I'm thinking of Uranus, Gemini, Pluto, Aquarius trine here. And the galactic connections are going to take this in leaps and bounds. I mean, we know the galactics are, we are galactics. We are galactic beings ourselves. But so many people are channeling them now. This is regular stuff on YouTube, isn't it? The Andromedans, the Arcturians, the Palladians. I mean, this is just day-to-day bread and butter now. But we are going to start to see them in greater numbers of humans, greater numbers of galactics, and have much more personal contact than we have ever had before. And clearly they are advanced intelligence, because they can fly around space and we can't at this point quite so freely. And we are going to reconnect with them. And that is going to be incredible in terms of the expansion of our consciousness, in a way I don't think we can even articulate, to really take us to new realms of what it means to be human. And I always want to stay as an organic human. I don't want to mess about with all kinds of implants and all of that. I'm old-fashioned in that way. So, but I think that is really going to take us on some evolutionary leaps that we just don't even have vocabulary for right now. That Uranus starts to move into Gemini on the 7th of July. We're in it. We're right in this, and it's fully into Gemini for another 7 years, from April 2026 until 2033. So there are going to be a lot of ingredients for us in terms of what we have seen as our tiny, very limited, linear understanding of the world into a massively expanded consciousness, which is multidimensional, and where we can experience many different lifetimes all at the same time. We're going to live in the now in a much bigger way, because this sense of linear time is going to disappear. And I think it's just beyond our comprehension, because our reality has been so limited in this lifetime and recent lifetimes. Is that making sense, Amrit? That was a bit of a ramble, but is that making sense?
No, it totally is. And I think it speaks to the fact that where we started, it was that, the rarity and the potencies. Like, if it's not seen before, like, how do you start to draw parallels? I just wanted to pull at a couple of threads from history just to sort of start to get some context on how seismic some of the shifts that we've experienced before when certain things have happened, to sort of point a finger at, like, hey, this is like that kind of level and then some, which is really, whereas, it's just really interesting. And I mean, we can share more about that, but you have a specific choice to stay organic. I think many people tuning into this podcast would likely share a similar sentiment. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I like to stay very sovereign. And so I'm quite a critical thinker, bit of a rebel, don't a lot necessarily go along with what I'm being told, because I think there could be a different way. So to me, staying sovereign is with within this organic being that I came into this incarnation with. And yes, we have iron in our blood that comes from the stars. We have calcium in our bones that come from the stars. So we are already a galactic being. But I think this is my personal choice, and everyone has to make their personal choice, because it's not up to me to. But if you start to receive implant, I mean, it can be very beneficial if you've had a terrible car accident and you're paralyzed, and then put in a nanochip to make you walk again. That's a wonderful thing. I know that implants for people who suffer from severe diabetes to regulate the insulin, you know, that's good stuff. But it then becomes a very slippery slope where we are starting to experiment with implants as we go forwards, which have no precedent. And once they're in, I'm not entirely sure you can take them out if you think, meh, I'm not so sure that was a great idea. Because who's got the control button? And so for me, and this is merely my own personal choice, I want to have sovereignty over my own body and my own consciousness. I don't want anything invasive that could start to take control of that. That feels very uncomfortable. That's again deferring to something external, whoever's got the control button. You know, our problem as humanity, certainly in this lifetime and recent ones, is we have deferred to the external. We've given away our power to external authority figures, and that has taken us into a victim consciousness, which is, I think, why we've ended up in recent times in terms of where we've been, in terms of, you know, the last 5 years, I think, have had a lot to say about that. And,
I mean,
and very productive as a catalyst to say, we're not going to do that anymore. You know, we're going to make our own choices, and as long as we are living in love, not doing any harm to any other living being, and, you know, not committing any crimes, but living in a very heart-centered way, then that is a great basis for a new community going forwards, a new humanity going forwards.
Inspired souls, if you're loving this video, please don't forget to give it a like and a thumbs up. It helps with everything we're doing here, and I would love to hear from you, as would Pam. Join in on the conversation below. Some of the questions from today's episode are actually questions that you left in the comments for me to ask Pam from the last time she was on. So join in on the conversation, leave your questions and your comments below. She's likely to be back on in the future, and I'd love to hear from you. What are you taking away from today's episode? What's your biggest takeaway? It is always so rich and such a pleasure to share in the insights with you all, and also learn from you guys in terms of what you're taking away and how that builds upon what each of us is taking away together. It's always such a rich and dynamic experience. Thank you so much. It's really interesting because there's a lot of stuff surfacing about, you know, the social experiment, or, you know, the stuff that happened, and, you know, 5 years ago where the whole world literally just shut down. And, you know, there's more and more stuff coming out now about, you know, what was prescribed to people and people were forced to sort of take. And some people said no and, you know, maintained their sovereignty. Some people struggled to say no. And, you know, some of the people that I know that struggled to say no did so for very valid reasons. They had kids, had mortgage, you know, and it was a trying time. And now one of the things that was just in my awareness that I just wanted to give voice to in this conversation, Touchwood, was I'm watching certain feeds and certain, you know, I appreciate why you don't watch the news, about people talking about like, oh, now that you've got this in your system, you should really be afraid now because... And I guess maybe I've done a bit too much Joe Dispenza work, but back to the point that we were making earlier in terms of where are you going to place your focus? You know, not to be naive about it, but I mean, some part of me is like, that's probably activating something pretty gnarly in somebody if they're going to be walking around feeling like that intrinsically desovereignized and polluted and victimed.
Yep. There are solutions right now. There are solutions right now. Natural and alternative solutions to that particular issue. And so there are always solutions, but you'll only find them if you really put your focus away from fear into, you know, I've had some really big health issues in my life, really big, one of which lasted for 39 years in total. I don't want to go into the detail of that here, but I never lost hope. I always knew there was a solution that I would find that would be natural and would work. And in 2018, and I was I was not in a good place physically then. And yes, I found an incredible solution that saved my life at the beginning of 2018. And, my knee was another one in 2022. I was in agony, pain in my knee. And the professor of surgery I went to see, who said, you've got to have a total knee transplant. And he showed me this plastic metal thing and said, you have no other options. And whenever somebody says to me, you have no other options, I thought, I bet I do. And I had an injection with my own blood plasma. Many people know the story. I've talked about it a lot to help other people. And it took about 15 minutes, took a blood sample, spun it in a centrifugal machine for 7 minutes, extracted my own blood plasma, which is like a teaspoon of honey-colored liquid, injected it back into my knee. And from agony, within about 3 days, I was walking for an hour, no sticks, no support, no pain. And people sent me a lot of healing, because I did ask for healing at that point too. I was in a really quite bad way, but I haven't had any pain since. And so I will, and there've been many other medical issues as well, which I won't go into, but I always think there's a solution. There is a natural solution, and I've just got to find it. I will not be victim to this. And that attitude, I think, has so far helped me find solutions.
Yeah, it draws it in, would you say? Like it pretty much draws the solution, like it magnetizes it towards you.
And it wouldn't have taken me 39 years if I had a bigger spiritual toolkit, but I didn't at the time. I do now. I get to it faster now. But nevertheless, I still managed to magnetize it in before I kind of popped off. So that saved my life in 2018.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's a bit rude to sort of say that I was about to say that segues, and then I was like, well, she's talking really deeply about her health, Amrit. You can't say segue. I was like, oops. But I was going to say that, if someone really wants to align with this rare window of time at the moment, like you've mentioned the inner work, I mean, the key thing seems to be belief at the moment. Are there certain practices that you recommend between now and 2028 for individuals?
Incredibly simple. Amrit, I wish I could say they're really complicated and you've got to pay me a lot of money to learn them, but that's not true. That's just not true. I mean, it's literally sitting in stillness, closing your eyes, watching your breath, whether you do that in your own home, whether you do that sitting in nature, just listening to the birds, just drop into stillness and bliss. And the more often you can drop into stillness and bliss, those are the cake ingredients that you are creating your future with and helping the collective with that. It's that simple. And because those are beautiful cake ingredients to create our future with, stillness and bliss. I do that several times, even though this week has been a bit of a roller coaster. I do that several times a day. And I can do it very easily in nature. I can do it very easily as I'm waking up in the morning. And I will deliberately and consciously drop into stillness and bliss. I live with love and peace and bliss. I live with love and joy and bliss. And though that sets my tone for the day. And it's really that simple, because if we're living from scattering our energy, giving away our power, thinking about the news narrative, those are the ingredients with which you're creating your future. And they're not great, because you're going to create more of what you think about all day long. What you focus on expands. So it's that simple for me. It's getting simpler, actually. It's really getting that simple. Drop into stillness and bliss on a regular basis.
The irony kind of being that simple is not always easy as well. And I'm noticing there's that famous, I think it's a Buddhist quote, which is like, I think it's the Dalai Lama. I'm paraphrasing, but he goes, you should meditate, for, let's just say 20 minutes a day, unless you've got a really busy day, in which case you should meditate for 40, and it's like, but it's like usually the first thing that sort of pops out is like your self-care piece, to drop in, to take a moment, to take a beat. There's a specific angle that you take on communities as well. The operative word kind of being grassroots. Can you explain a little bit why, what role you sort of see these playing in the emerging age?
Yeah.
And are these like an antidote to top-down structures? Because you've mentioned this like linear kind of,
Because again, if I look back in history with Pluto in Aquarius, one of the big themes always for that is the weakening of the top-down structure. We are telling you what to do. We are the rich people at the top telling you poor peasants what to do. So whether in the 1500s it was the Catholic Church, whether in the 1700s it was, autocratic monarchies, however you'd categorize this today, of corporations, institutions, governments that have power over us, it is that sort of unequal socioeconomic political structure. That's what is going to crack and crumble, and is doing so right now. And the historical trend has always been grassroots. If we look back to the 1700s and the French Revolution, July 1789, it went from being a very autocratic monarchy when the French stormed the Bastille, took down the monarchy, monarch was beheaded, and France became a republic. But from that time, that was really the end of monarchy in Europe, because there were documents that appeared just a month later from the Assemblée Nationale. There was a paper called the Declaration of the Rights of Man, not women at that time, but man, never mind, to give more equal rights to all men. And that was the beginning of a middle class for the very first time, certainly in France, but it spread across Europe. It was the beginning of democracy. People started up small farms, they started up small businesses and artisan collectives and that kind of thing. So that's the history. The tax system was revised to take away the benefits from the aristocracy and give them to the more ordinary people. So that has always been a very big theme of Pluto and Aquarius. But the way I'm seeing it right now, because people feel that they're losing trust to some degree in those top-down systems, and particularly as a boomerang over the last 5 years, people want to come together as humans. And I've talked a lot about, I'm in a group that I joined a few years ago. It's an in-person physical group. And, such was the state of the world then. It was just wonderful to come together with other human beings, all different ages, all different backgrounds, of carpenters and builders and gardeners and healers and the odd astrologer here and there, and just hug and laugh. It was the value of the human connection was profound because we'd been denied it. So there was this boomerang effect. And so people are forming what I call families of frequency now. So that can either be online, as you are doing. You are creating a family, you're creating your own community, Amrit. It can be online, but also in person. There are ventures like the Stargate experience that have podcasts, but also physical. Come and join us in, XYZ, come and join us in the Azores or Turkey or wherever. But they're also more local. The Stand in the Park movement is very big for this, because that's a global movement where literally people, 10 o'clock on a Sunday, come together for free in a park under a tree and just socialize and just share and be joyful. And they are forming little subgroups where they can buy an allotment or they can buy a little patch of land. There are some people I know I was just speaking with yesterday, and one person has a very large garden. So about a dozen of them are coming together in her garden, and they've each got a little vegetable plot, and they're sharing their vegetables within her garden. So there's a real desire I want to share. I don't want to live alone, locked up, no social connection, 6 feet apart. I want to share in that human connection, share food. And also, I think food production is going to be quite tested going forwards because of the changes in climate, etc. And that's for natural and unnatural reasons. But nevertheless, we may have some dislocations in the food production line, which means that it's really a good idea. You can grow some sprouts on your windowsill, some sprouting seeds, that kind of thing, but also get together with your neighbors. Can you grow tomatoes and they can grow parsnips or whatever? So you can share vegetables. Coming together to share is a really big part of this Aquarian energy. It's also linked to Uranus in Gemini too. Local communities, local sharing. So I think this is going to really take off going forwards, but particularly if you can get together with people on the same frequency that are kind of on the same hymn sheet as you and seeing the world in the same way, having the same world view, that will be particularly productive, because that's very supportive when times get challenging.
And there is something about the oxytocin of just, I don't want to sound touchy-feely, but just touching and feeling people. Like there's, I mean, this this podcast
some
was birthed.
wonderful friendships have come out of that. I mean, truly wonderful. You know, that weren't available before, because we'd never have met in those groups if it hadn't been for what happened 5 years ago. There'd be no need.
It's, yeah, I was going to say the birthplace of this podcast was actually, just to sort of inspire some people on, was before there was Inspired Evolution, there was this thing called Mandala Moments. And every 2 Fridays, I say every fortnight, but I know in certain places fortnight doesn't translate, but every fortnight I'd have, I'd just open up my doors on a Friday evening and I'd invite some people over. And the curious thing that I did was I invited people that I was inspired by. Inspired Evolution. You know, it was my yoga teacher that was there. And yeah, like authors, people that were just in my local community that I thought were really cool, but they didn't know each other, but I knew of them. And it was just chai chats in community. It was really straightforward. It was just come, I'll make chai. I'm Indian. It works. It fits. We'll have some chats, and a sense of community was espoused on that. And it was actually the community that sort of kept pushing in the end to sort of that you should start a podcast. And I was like, oh, I don't know about this podcasting thing. I had a massive resistance actually at the time. But I think sometimes when we think about grassroots community, it can sound like a much bigger deal than it really is. I mean, I set up a Facebook group at the time, and it was invite 5 people, and then that sort of just grew. But eventually there was like 30, 35 people sitting in my living room. It was a bit of a seance, but anyway, but it doesn't have to be that complicated.
Exactly. It's a beautiful idea, Amrit, a beautiful idea, because people are doing this kind of thing all over the world, whether it's the Stand in the Park groups, whether it's people in your own living room, whether it's meditations globally. Lynn McTaggart is the queen of this, Joe Dispenza, all those wonderful thought leaders. So but whether you're doing it in small numbers or big numbers, it all adds to this tsunami of love that we're creating for the future. Every single person doing that love is rippling out to the collective. And the more we can do that, it's just going to become a tidal wave of heart-centered love, compassion, joy, peace. Boy, could we live in a better world than this. And we know we can. And the astrology of the moment gives us the vision. It gives us the kind of symbols to work with to give us the vision. It doesn't give us the events so much, because it's up to us as humanity to co-create and manifest the events. But it gives us the ingredients of incredible inspiration, positivity, and love. And that's what we've got to focus on. And we can do it way better than what we've lived through in this lifetime, particularly in recent times.
Inspired souls, lumen beings. Pam's talking about the importance of community, and it really is landing here at the Inspired Evolution. And if you haven't connected in these spaces before, maybe now's a really great time to start. So what we've set up is the Inspired Evolution Circle online. You can go check it out at inspiredevolution.com/circle. If you've been coming along to the Sunday services, now we're evolving. So Sunday service was a very one-way, like you guys asking questions and myself sharing what I could from the insights from the podcast I've learned. But the comment section was always lighting up with all of you sharing so much of yourselves in those sections as well. So now the up level is we're going on Zoom, where we can ultimately see all of each other, connect in real time, similar vibes, Q&A, sharing from the podcast and the insights, just where you're at on your journey amongst each other as well. And yeah, obviously meditations, weekly intentions set together as well. I expect this space to expand over time. Touch wood, right now this is just the next iteration on what was there in Sunday service. So coming along, connect with the community. This is the online community space now for all of us here at the Inspired Evolution. As always, it's such an honor to be your brother walking this path by your side. You can check us out, inspiredevolution.com/circle. I'll put a link in the description at the top if you guys really want to forge in together as community. I look forward to seeing you there. Well, I was going to say, it couldn't come a moment sooner. I mean, people started to talk about all these dis-eases of isolation. And it's palpable looking around, just the way yeah, I mean, people are boxed in, living in apartments. Like it can be quite an interesting life in 2025 for a lot of people. Looking at a phone, like needing some support, and just wondering who do I call, and realizing there's no one there on the other end.
That's really sad. That's really sad.
Yeah.
It's, I've been in those situations, many times, and it's horrible. You just kind of, you shrink. You can feel your energy shrinking, and it's really horrible. And that's why, if you can connect to anybody, you're doing wonderful work, Amrit, with this podcast and bringing people together. Online is great, but also if you can do it in person, as people come into your living room, physical contact, I think, is really important, because you can do the hugging and you can do the hugging for real, which is harder online. And that sense of I am not alone, that other people here to care and support, it is immense in terms of how that shifts your frequency, immense. But I think big events where people come together to meditate and share and find joy together, that will become a much bigger thing moving forwards.
I love that. Thank you for the hearty prescription. I love that. Hey, we were chatting just before you jumped on about imaginal cells. Can you tell me a little bit about imaginal cells and what you've discovered? Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about?
Yeah, it was so interesting, and I had a kind of insight, because Saturn in astrology gets a bad rap. There was a
what, Saturn? No, that old taskmaster and the discipline and all the all the right angles and.
How long is that going to last? So Saturn gets a very bad rap because it is about, it was Capricorn, so it's about traditional structures and rulership and rules and regulations and the way things used to be and tradition, etc., etc. But it can also teach you mastery. It can also teach you discipline. This combination of Neptune and Saturn is about spiritual discipline, becoming a spiritual master. That's a big part of spiritual sovereignty going forwards. Anyway, I learned about imaginal cells, which I wasn't aware of before. And we're all familiar with the process of the caterpillar going into the chrysalis and sort of becoming mush, turning to liquid, and then finally emerging as the butterfly. So we're all aware of that metamorphosis process. But what I didn't know was, within the caterpillar, from the birth of the caterpillar, there are their caterpillar cells and their butterfly cells. And the butterfly cells are imaginal cells. They're different kinds of cells. And the butterfly cells are basically dormant until a time capsule, just like the acorn to the oak tree, and just like humanity is going through right now in its evolution, a time capsule is activated and the butterfly cells start to multiply. And because the butterfly cells are seen by the caterpillar cells as the enemy, the caterpillar cells start to eat and destroy the butterfly cells because they think it's an enemy. But because they have to build resilience, Saturn, the butterfly cells multiply and multiply and multiply to the point that they completely outrun the caterpillar cells. And that's when the butterfly emerges from the chrysalis. So the action of the resistance Saturn of the old Saturn caterpillar cells strengthens the formation of the butterfly to eventually be able to fly, to go from only being able to move a few inches on the ground per day to complete freedom, to flying from flower to flower and all the fragrances and colors, etc. And that metamorphosis process is strengthened, Saturn, by the resistance of the old caterpillar cells. So that to me was a great kind of metaphor for the way that Saturn can operate in our birth charts and in this particular astrology that we've got right now. So see it as a strengthening of your discipline, of your mastery, of your spiritual warriorship, I want to call it. I know a lot of people don't like that word warrior, but I think this real sense of spiritual activism and sovereignty is so strong in people at the moment, because this is our chance as humanity to take that leap, to go through this metamorphosis that's only just beginning. Does that make sense?
yeah, if it wasn't for the resistance of the caterpillar cells, like the butterfly doesn't actually get to emerge the way that it's meant to. And how beautiful to call them imaginal cells, because it already has that sort of imagination, future forecasting sort of vibe and frequency in there. Like that is beyond poetic. It's profound.
And it's such a jump in state, isn't it? So, because if you said to the caterpillar one day you'll be able to fly around, all the freedom in the world, visit all these flowers, the caterpillar would say, "You out of your mind? I can barely move 3 inches in a day."
Put the peace pipe down.
The jump. It's the same with water, the old grey boring water nymphs to the dragonfly, the same jump in state. But that is the kind of metaphor that I think is very relevant to what we are just at the beginning of as humanity. And to optimize that, we have got to stay in this good, loving, emotional state, because that's the frequency we're creating with. And that's why I feel so strongly, and I'm always banging the drum about this, because it's such a unique opportunity. We need to make the best of it.
Right. And I'm just pulling it together now because Saturn is actually at that 0 degrees Aries too.
Yeah, it's at the creator degree. That's what's so amazing about that metaphor, if you like, because it's the creator degree. It's the very first degree of the zodiac. It's the big new beginning that is being fueled by Pluto and Uranus as well, and other dwarf planets like Sedna, and I could go on for a long time. But it's an absolute rocket ship of jump for humanity, particularly if we can get this right. But it's a co-creation. It's not happening to us, it's happening through us. And I think that's a really, really, really important distinction to make. That's why we're changing our physicality. We're gradually shifting from carbon to crystalline, but it's happening through us. It's not just a film that some creator has imagined that's being imposed on us. We are actually the co-producers, the co-participants, the co-creators, and it's happening through us. That's why it's so important to keep your state of being, and I said itself, our state of being is our absolutely top priority, and everything in our life cascades from that. And it does collectively too.
How long ago did Saturn cross over Aries last time?
That was in 90. It crossed over Aries. It has a 29.5 year cycle. So every 29.5 years, it will cross over 0 of Aries. Neptune has a 165 year cycle. So every 165 years, it will cross over 0 of Aries. They come together every 36 years, but they don't come together at 0 of Aries and at the point of Pluto and Uranus as well. So it's the particular geometry and on those degrees that make it so powerful. And as Ray Merriman said, this is, he can't find a time in history this has ever happened. And you have to go back several thousand years to even find the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 of Aries. You have to go back at least 6,000 years for that. But you plug in Pluto and Uranus as well, Saturn and Neptune at the midpoint, we believe that is a completely unique configuration on those degrees, that geometry on those degrees. That's why this is so remarkable. And then you add in the dwarf planets as well, the fact that Uranus is going to be conjunct Sedna, starting in July, and that will be conjunct for about the next sort of 2 to 3 years, and that is going to ignite Saturn's mythology, which is all about metamorphosis. Do you know the myth, Amrit?
I was just about to ask you, please.
To abbreviate it, Sedna, this is a story about a female who lived in the Arctic and in the Arctic wastes, and she had an inappropriate marriage and begged her father to come and rescue her from it. And he came in a kayak, and they set off in the kayak, and a big storm blew up. And in order to save himself, her father threw Sedna, his daughter, out of the canoe, and she tried to cling on with her fingers so she wouldn't drown, and he chopped her fingers off, which is not a great thing for a father to do. So she floated down to the deep and transmuted into a sea goddess, and her fingers became incredibly beautiful sea creatures of dolphins and whales and turtles. completely new, beautiful sea creatures, which, as we were talking about earlier, are 15th dimensional. So she is now the Arctic sea goddess. And in the myth, it's said that sailors still have to ask for safe passage when they are crossing those waters, because Sedna is still kind of active there. But that was a myth of a total metamorphosis of state. Yet another one. And so planet Uranus, which is a kind of activator or ignition point, is moving to conjunct Sedna from the 7th of July and will kind of crisscross Sedna for the next 2 to 3 years. That's another part of this configuration. So it is, again, activating this sense of a big metamorphosis for humanity. It will also make AI absolutely exponential. It will make our understanding of consciousness and neural networks just phenomenal. It'll make our understanding of the deep seas and what's happening in inner Earth, because she's very deep in the oceans. All of what's happening under the Arctic and then Antarctica. What's going on. Those kinds of things. There's so much to come from that symbolism, but it is being activated as of this July. So astrologers, every astrologer is going to be talking about that. So that's another big part of this picture.
Given the mythology, there's a deep sense of betrayal in there. Do we feel that as part of the frequency as well?
Patriarchy does not come well out of this, does it? Husband doesn't come well, father doesn't come well. Correct. And so this is what we're going through in a bigger sense in society right now. How do we feel about patriarchal systems? How do we feel about that, ruled by Saturn? Pluto has been in Capricorn until, well, it fully moved out last November 2024. But Pluto tends to show anything which is not operating for our highest good in Capricorn while it was there, from 2008 until the end of November 2024. And so it tends to reveal any corruption or anything that's not for our highest good for humanity in those top-down structures. So 2008, when Pluto moved in, Capricorn's also connected to the banking structure, big money. What did we have? We had the financial crisis, September 2008. But also, I think since 2008, there has been more revelation of things that may not be for the best of humanity. And that is going to be accelerating as Pluto moves through Aquarius, which is much more about freedom, about humanity coming together, and how can we help each other as community, as a global community, as well as a local community.
Wow, I'm really feeling that rarity gives potency. Is there a myth behind Saturn as well, Pam?
Well, it's linked to Kronos, who is Lord of Time. And so, yes, there is a whole myth linked to Uranus and Saturn as well, because they are linked, father, son, and there's a whole thing about castration involved in that. That's pretty grisly. But Saturn is always the sort of antithetical point to Uranus, because Saturn is the old, it's the father figure, it's the traditional, it rules linear time, it rules 3D reality, it rules the tangible. And Uranus is the opposite to that, really. It rules youth and breaking up traditions, freedom. No, we're not going to obey the rules and regulations, we're going to do it our way. And whenever Uranus comes up strongly, which it is very much at the moment because it rules Aquarius, it's very much about revolution and youth as well, youth coming to the fore to rebel and say, we're not doing this anymore. And I think going forwards, the so-called leaders will not be the old greybeards, in the way we've had them in the past. It will be people your age, Amrit, and younger, the visionaries, the progressives, the innovators, people who are inventing these incredible free energy technologies. And the work you're doing, it will be that kind of thing, and people saying, I want to gather around those people, I want to be the team to help those ideas come to fruition in the world. It's going to be that kind of social structure moving forwards. So Saturn will act as the resistance to strengthen our impetus and our will to create that and to help make it manifest. Saturn makes things manifest. You know, we may have this pie in the sky idea about, oh, wouldn't it be great to live in community? Saturn says, get real. How are you going to actually do that? In a very helpful way. It can be very productive. You know, get your plan together. Where do you find the land? How do you magnetize it in? You know, what's your plan? And so it brings in a degree of pragmatism as well to the big dream of Neptune. But they're going to, potentially they can work incredibly well together. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It really does. And I mean, yeah, I think strengthening resolve is just such a, just such a potent message for this time that we are all going through. And you're always so generous with your sharings, Pam. And I think it's just every time you come on, I think the scope that's afforded just really, really helps in terms of feeling centered, dare I say safe and whole again. Yeah, I mean, I'll put a link to You Don't Really Believe in Astrology, Do You? Below as well. Yeah, and how to co-create using the secret language of the universe. I mean, so many amazing resources in your YouTube channel down there. But yeah, I mean, it is always such a gift and a pleasure. And I think especially at this time as we're doing these episodes, I think it is, like you said, a really potent time, a really rare time. There can be the feel of a squeeze, but like you said, astrology can be extremely grounding and sort of saying, yep, and build your spiritual warriorship, and let's, you know, focus and we get together and work through this together. And focusing our attention and learning how important that is to dial it in at this particular time. More like it's always important, but even more so now, you know.
Stay strong, hold the vision. Yeah, that's what I really feel. And that's why I like to explore subjects, Amrit, that are sort of going slightly beyond astrology and feeding it into the astrology, because they're entirely, all these different modalities and things I'm learning are entirely compatible with the astrological message, but they reinforce it. They reinforce it to give us this idea of convergences and game changers in this time. So hold the vision and remember that analogy I've so often used, you know, when I was 26 and I was going off traveling for months on my own, and I was doing that basic martial arts course, and we had to learn to split a builder's plank. I've talked about this before. But the trick, you know, if you're focused on the plank, you'd really hurt your hand. But the trick the teacher taught us was focus 6 inches below the plank. Then it's actually quite easy. Focus on where you want to get to. Hold the vision, hold the line. That's what we're all doing in terms of frequency to magnetize in this more loving world.
Thank you for your potent reminders and holding the vision with us.
Thank you, Amrit. It's been an absolute joy to be with you.
You inspired soul, you made it through to the end of another incredible episode. How amazing is Pam Gregory? It is always such a treat and honor to have her on. And thank you so much for listening all the way through to the end. You obviously liked this video, so please do give it a like, give it a thumbs up. It helps champion our videos all around the internet. Thank you so much for your support. And to all of you that are subscribed to the channel, man, thank you so much for your incredible love and support. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. I mean, I cannot thank you enough. And to all of you that aren't yet subscribed at the time of this recording, that's about 80% of you that regularly watch these videos that haven't yet hit subscribe, please do take a moment. As you hit the subscribe button, I'm pointing to it just here, it's lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon. As you're doing that, you're joining the movement, championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet. Thank you so much for your support. And obviously this episode has inspired your evolution onwards, upwards, and inwards. So go on screen now to continue your journey. I'll see you in the next one. Take your pick, make your click. I'll see you there.